I obviously have to talk about Brexit today, even though some of you may think that there will one day be an occasion when we can talk about something else, the weather or something like that. But until such time, Brexit remains the most important political issue facing our nation. And how brilliant that there are people here from Boxhouse School today. Sorry, Robin, I got these new glasses, I can't read with them and see at the same time. I'm from Bayhouse School because Brexit is going to be so important in the lives of people currently being educated, currently at school and at university. And it will be the most enormous opportunity for them because, ladies and gentlemen, they will have control of their own future in a way that we haven't had since 1973. That it will be their decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, some of the people here today are going to have leading roles in our country in the decades to come. And when they've got those leading roles, they then will be able to decide things for the nation if they can have the support of the nation. And they won't have to get approval from 27 other European countries and from a bureaucracy in Brussels to do it. Isn't that an exciting thought? And I hope the students here, it is an empowering thought. And if I were to bet my future, I would rather bet it on people here than I would on people being educated in Brussels. Because I think people of our country will have our interests at heart and will make decisions that are better for our nation individually than can be made at the Brussels collective. But that, of course, goes back to what I was saying about you as an association and how I believe in things that are built from the bottom up. It is the same with the nation state as it is with the Conservative Association. So thank you. Where are we? We are at, as somebody put it to me, about to be at the crunch point. We will know within a week or two what the government is going to be offering us as a Brexit deal. And people like me will have to respond to that. Now at the moment, there are stories in all the newspapers that are there to make your flesh crawl. And some of them may be right, and some of them may be wrong. I'm trying to avoid firing at shadows. Because if I fire at shadows now, when we have the final result, I may find that I've used up all my ammunition and that there's something hidden away that we didn't know about that is far worse than anything that has been leaked so far. So for the time being, I'm encouraging people to be a little bit cautious and wait and see what actually happens. But then we need to consider what the possibilities are. What may come out over the next few weeks? And then how do we respond? Well, first of all, there is a possibility that there is a deal based on checkers. That is to say, maintaining very close alignment with the European Union, being tied into the Common Rule Book, and the Common Rule Book is a misnomer, as I'm sure you all know. The Common Rule Book has a French name. It's the Acquis Communautaire. You may have heard of that before. That is the rule book of the European Union. And guess which court judges on the Acquis Communautaire? Do you think it's the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? No, it's the European Court of Justice. So that won't work. We can't accept that. I won't vote for that if that's what we get. And nor will many other Conservative MPs. We're now getting rumours that the backstop will be a customs union with no specified end date but called temporary. Now, we have young students of politics here, and they no doubt know that in Gladstone's 1853 budget, he promised that income tax would be temporary and would expire in 1860. Well, we're a few years from 1860 now, and the income tax is still getting strong. They probably also know that the 1911 Parliament Act says in its preamble that it is a temporary measure until a more democratic means of having an upper chamber can be found. Oh, right, in the grand scheme of ancient Egypt, 100 years isn't such a long time. In the dynasties that came and went in China, 100 years is not such a very long time. But in most of our lives, 100 years seems a little bit more than temporary. So I am very suspicious of anything in the backstop short of a clearly defined endpoint for any customs union. Because the customs union is the heart of the European project. It started with a customs union, as did, of course, the unification of Germany. That how you get states together begins with a customs union. It's the most obvious thing to do. But it denies us the opportunities of Brexit. It means that we can't reduce the price of food, clothing and footwear, improving the living standards of the least well-off in our society. It means we carry on subsidising and protecting inefficient continental industries and industries that we don't necessarily have in this country. Remaining in the customs union would not be leaving, and it would be an abject failure, which again I would not be able to vote for. And when I say I, it may be worth trying to explain what the numbers are in the House of Commons, in Conservative circles. I won't try and go in too much to the Labour Party. It's not my area of expertise.
I'm not very pleasant, are you?
Very good heckler. So you've got a higher class of heckler in Gosport. When I say I, the European Research Group reckons to have about 80 people who are either subscribers or are supporters. Now there's a much bigger number of Eurosceptics, that is to say people who supported Brexit. That's probably about half the parliamentary party. But some of those are in government and some of those don't want to align themselves to an organisation. Within that 80, I am not the most hard-line. And that's important to remember because you may be reading in the papers that the government thinks it can peel off the European Research Group members. Well, just say that the Chief Whip, who I think highly of, I like very much, but that's not enough to make me easy to peel off, were able to peel me off. There are still probably 40 who are more hardline than I am, more rigorous than I am, more determined to stop a failed Brexit than I am, who would not be peeled off. So even in the very unlikely event that I am peelable, not to make a joke about the 1840s political situation and Sir Robert Peel, they still wouldn't have enough to get things through. And that's absolutely crucial. If it is a bad deal, it will be voted down. And the Labour Party, who I will, as I say, only mention in passing, will not resist the temptation of defeating the government. And the reason they won't resist that temptation is they think it will lead to a general election. But can I reassure you, it won't. How can I say so confidently? Well, the coalition passed a dreadful piece of legislation entirely outside the grain of the British Constitution, failing to understand that the government needs to command a majority in the House of Commons, and it's called the Fixed Term Parliament Act. But it's extremely useful at the moment, so however much I dislike it, I'm quite glad that it's there. In normal circumstances, if you vote against the government on a major issue, that's a confidence vote and an election ensues. But under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, if there is a vote to vote down the government's European deal, then the next day I can support the government on a vote of confidence and there is no election. And I am confident that no Tory MP will oppose the government on a vote of confidence. Why? Well, if you're a Eurosceptic, you're not frightened of no deal. And I'll come back to that. And if you're a pro-European, you don't want no deal, but you have to weigh up in your mind, do you want no deal more or less than you want Jeremy Corbyn? And do you want your friends to lose their job? And that's a really serious point. You should never ignore the personal in politics. You see, if there were a general election tomorrow, seats like Loughborough, Nicky Morgan's seat, would have a small majority. Our seats, it's very unlikely that we would hold. And so the pro-Europeans would be saying to themselves, not that we will defeat those awful hard-line Eurosceptics who we oppose so much, but that we would lead to people, our friends, losing their seats. And I don't think there would be any such thing as a safe seat if we had an election in the circumstances of a collapse of government policy. I think it would be very, very bad for the Conservative Party. And so people like me, sitting on 10,000 majorities, would be feeling pretty nervous. Gosport, you're right, don't worry. As long as you give plenty of money to the fighting fund, because the Treasurer's sitting here and he's looking very nervous. So that's why we won't lose a vote of confidence, because all Tory MPs will think it's better to keep a Conservative government, regardless of what's happening in the EU, than to risk Jeremy Corbyn. The last point is, why am I not frightened of no deal? The Bank of England are terrified of no deal. The Office for Budget Responsibility has said we'll be back to the 3-day week, which I do just remember as a child. It was very exciting. We had candles out and all sorts, but the excitement of a 3-year-old is not the practical politics of a 49-year-old. So don't worry, my childhood memories won't influence my voting. The IMF, the OECD, they all think it will be terrible. Well, they said just voting for Brexit would be terrible, so their track record isn't very good. And I accept it will be difficult initially. I think it would be really silly of me to stand up in front of you and say, oh, there won't be any queues going over from Dover, or that there won't be any disruptions in some supply chains. But I can be confident that they will be temporary, because they hit the other side just as much, if not more, than they hit us, and that certain economies, certain European economies, and certain regions of European economies are very heavily dependent on the trade they do with the UK. But that once we've got through that stage, the world is our oyster. We are no longer looking at ourselves as a peripheral European state, we're looking at ourselves back in our proper role as a global state, a global power, the fifth biggest economy in the world, trading with everybody, opening up our markets, both for us to sell and for us to buy. But for us to buy things that improve our standard of living, help the least well off in our society the most. The opportunities from Brexit are huge. And after a short period of some discomfort, we would in fact get to them earlier than leaving with a deal. So although I prefer a deal, I'm not entirely averse to saving £40 billion of your money. No such thing as government money, is there? It's taxpayers' money. So £40 billion go quite a long way in Gosport, might get your railway station reinstated. That's not, by the way, that is not a promise.
And that's the fine
in case you invite me back, don't then say to me, where's the railway station you promised with £40 billion? But I mentioned that merely as an example of what we could do to improve the country's infrastructure, which needs improving. And so the excitement of leaving without a deal is that we get to do things for ourselves faster. So what's my message today? My message today is thank you. And thank you for continuing to support us at difficult times. My second message is be patient. I still hope, that faint remaining hope, to remember the last thing to hop out of Pandora's box is hope. And we always cling to that. I hope that the Prime Minister will in fact present a deal that I can support. Because the Tory party is at its strongest when it is united. But if I'm not able to do that, I will make sure as far as I can that a proper Brexit is delivered, which will be to the advantage of the country and the Conservative Party. Because voting down a bad deal won't lead to a snap election. Implementing a bad deal will destroy the Conservative Party. Why? Because 70% of our voters back Brexit. And if we cheat them, if we don't deliver for them, if we fail them in the biggest democratic exercise in our nation's history, I don't suppose they'll all go running over to Jeremy Corbyn. But when on election day there's a little bit of mist, and a little bit of rain, and there's a slight wind, they'll sit at home and have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
They won't put up their umbrella and go out. They won't drag their friends out. They won't say, look, we've got to go and vote for our fantastic Conservative candidate because look at the great thing they've done to save our nation, to set us on the right track for a next generation or 2 generations or a century. They will say, we voted for those people before. They promised they would be tough and they'd be weak. They promised they'd deliver on Brexit and they haven't. We will stay at home. And if that means Mr. Corbyn gets in, well, that's their fault, not the voters' fault. And it will be our fault if we don't deliver, which is why I'm so determined that we must deliver and to do everything that we can do to deliver. And that will involve, if necessary, me and members of the ERG voting to stop a non-Brexit Brexit.